be moderating the panel and also invite the panelists on stage.
Facebook event. And just before we would start this panel discussion, GE has won the third time the Family Friendly Employer Award in Hungary, and also became a so-called mentor company, which means that we need to share best practices, what we do in this whole family-friendly space. And I believe that we cannot really have a family-friendly company if we don't have great leaders who are supporting that. So we have 4 of them here on stage. Please welcome them. And I would like to, I just said leaders, not parents. We will discuss that later, whether you are great parents as well. For leaders, I can say that for sure. So let's start with a quick introduction of yourself as a leader, as a parent. Shriram, you would start?
My name is Sriram Nagarajan, 15 years within General Electric company, father of 2 boys, and we have moved quite a few times within the company, and we continue to thrive successfully both as a family and within GE.
Sure. So Michael Pinto, been with GE for 10 years. In the last 10 years, I've had the privilege and honor of living in Brussels, London, and now Budapest. I'm also the father of 2 children, aged 13 and 14, who've obviously been with us throughout the changes. I'm very happy to be here today.
Thank you. I'm Ilona Barca. I'm an HR leader at GE, coming up on 20 years with the company. I'm Hungarian-American, but I've actually spent all my GE career working in Hungary. And I have a 10-year-old son, coming up on 10-year-old son.
Hi, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Andrea Szabó-Mészáros. I'm leading the Hungary site for GE Aviation here in Veresegyház, not too far from Budapest. I started my career at GE about 20 years ago, just like Ilona. And I started my career as an Edison Engineering Leadership Program member. And this is my 4th business. I have 2 kids. My eldest one, my daughter, is 19. And my little one, my son, is 10.
So thank you very much for the introduction. We have talked a lot about a typical working time. We talk a lot about work-life balance and the challenges that we need to face in life. I know, Ilona, that you slowed down your career once or twice. Could you share that with us, why it happened and how GE treated you during that?
Thank you. So I'm not sure I would say that working part-time means I slowed down my career, but I did 2 things. So one is that I've often done what you would consider slowing down my career. In other words, sort of deciding whether there was something extra or promotion that I wanted or didn't want or wanted to go for. And so in that sense, I would say I maybe would have had potential to go higher faster, but it sort of depended on me. The other thing is about working part-time. So I actually worked twice part-time while I've been at GE, once before I had a baby and once after maternity leave. So maybe that piece is a little bit unique just because I wanted a bit more life and a bit less work. And that was a super interesting experience because I thought that the world would end. Basically, I thought that my clients as an HR manager would just not know how to deal with it, and it would become problematic. And in fact, when I sort of went around and told the partners that I work with that I'm going to shift my schedule, I'm not going to be working on Mondays, here's how we're going to make it work, there's going to be a recruiter that takes some of my work, etc. All these leaders just, their eyes opened wide and said, wow, you can do that, and people actually changed their behavior. So one guy said he's going to stop coming in and commuting to the office on Mondays because the traffic is so horrible on Monday morning. And he can actually have a much better both work and life if he just, quits that commute, which is the biggest pain in his week. But it was great. It was a big driver of behavior. And I swear to this day, this was like 15 years ago, but to this day, people still ask me, like, can they call me on Monday, even though it was actually only a 6-month period.
Mike, I don't know how to bring this up, but you had to make you didn't have to make a very hard choice. Life put you into a very difficult situation. Could you share your story with us, please?
Sure. So, being a parent and being a family member means you're part of a team. And sometimes as life happens, unexpected things might occur. And I guess the vantage point that I have on parenthood and GE as an employer is, I wouldn't say unique, but certainly less frequent. And 8 years ago, my wife was diagnosed terminally ill, and 6 years ago, happily, her life was saved through a double lung transplant. But the 2 years in the run up to that event were particularly heavy, and I found GE. I found in GE an ally, right? It's kind of difficult to put into words the kind of circumstances you run into as a parent of a then 5 and 6-year-old kid, two children, and having to reconcile sort of hospital visits and endless nights, taking care of your spouse, and also work, right? And so I think what really resonated with me was GE's approach to that entire challenge that I was facing. On the one hand, my line managers were quick to point out that your role, your position, all of what you retain important in terms of your work and career, they're there, right? So an element of security around that aspect, while there was also recognition that if at any point in time I needed to put my head where my head needed to be for the family, that the company was there, right? They proved that time and again. So much so that it allowed me to, feel freer about working odd hours, working at home. When you're trying to cover different bases, you need that flexibility. And I would say the other element that came in extremely, deeply grateful for the second element of support, which, by the way, I still occasionally need to sort of lean in on, is the network, right? GE's got a tremendously powerful network. And we were able to, benefit in a sense from having a medical doctor step in and provide some further insights to my wife's condition, second opinions and things of that nature, which, that's a tall order. Not a lot of companies can do that. And I think the HR community also helping us to, bridge gaps from a medical care perspective as we move from country to country. These are all things that are extremely important to maintain a stable family life, right? And so I think my vantage point on parenthood is somewhat skewed by those kind of events. So,
thank you very much. Thank you. We just had a people review for those who don't work for GE. People review is when we are discussing our teams, how we can develop our talents. And one of my leaders was talking about one of our ship supervisors, and he went on and on about the great things about him. And lastly, he said, and he's a great father. So, and we started to laugh. Why do you think that it's important to bring that up? And he said, because from parenthood, you learn how to be a better leader. Could you share your own story, whether parenthood helped you to be a better leader, or how it helps you to lead complex, multinational, multi-generational teams? Sure.
Sure. So I own finance within the center here. There's about 800, 900 people, so the accountability is pretty high. 2 boys, one going to the 6th grade. So I own equally teaching math and science to my older son. The say-do ratio at home is as important as the say-do ratio at work. So to date, I've continued to maintain that commitment of teaching him both science and math. As I said, we've had to move about, a few times within the company, and managing those cultural changes within Germany, Switzerland, England, and now in Hungary, integrating them through the systems in each location is as consistent as what we have done at work, meaning when you're in a company with 180 plus locations, 180 countries, cross-cultural integration becomes that much more consistent and important. So that's how I see these two coming together pretty well, right? Cross-cultural integration and maintaining a high say-do ratio both at home and at work.
Andrea, you said you have a Y and Z generation at home. We just had a chit chat. I know Andrea's daughter when she was 8 or 9, and she told me, "Oh, she's already 19." so that's how I'm measuring how older I'm getting. So
But
what
I'm getting younger. It's
you
just
do?
you who
It's
is
only
getting
me.
one.
It's only me. So what do you learn from home that you can take to the workplace?
Yeah, thank you very much for this question. Yeah, as I'm thinking about what is the characteristics of Y generation, and why it's important, by the way, that we should be aware of that, is because, now Y generation will be the next, or is already the next generation who we are hiring and employing. So, for example, if I'm just thinking about our intern students who we are currently having on our site, and we have like 13, 14, it's really important that we would give them meaningful jobs as well, meaningful tasks. But in order to be able to do that, we need to be really aware of what they really need, how we should best treat them. So one thing that I've learned already is that, they learn very fast and they're eager to learn, which is great. So we need to give them the opportunity to be able to learn newer and newer things. That's one. The other one is they love to get very interesting, very challenging tasks, and in a pretty rapid frequency. So that's the other one which we need to keep in mind when we are employing them, if we really want to keep them with the company. We just recently, about 2 weeks ago, had an intern day. Time to time we do that, which means that each of them have to give us a presentation, a 10, 15 minute long presentation about what they have accomplished during the past 6-8 months. And all of us, I can tell you, were amazed to see how great and how talented this generation is, and how we can really rely on them. So, and kudos to, of course, to the assignment leaders who are taking good care of them. And I can tell that most of them were doing such work which a new employee would do. So we were not, or we are not just treating them like they were interns, but actually like employers. And employees, I'm sorry, and that is great, and that's what they need, and they are learning very, very fast.
Thank you very much. We talk a lot about trust and vulnerability in GE, so maybe this is the question where you need to show your vulnerable side as well. But let me start first. I'm a professional perfectionist, so. It's out. So as a parent, I had to learn I cannot be a perfect father. It's okay to be a good enough father, and that made me to recognize that it's okay to be a good enough leader. I don't need to be a perfect leader. I cannot be a perfect leader. Did you have the same experience? Could you share your human side of yourself? Because it's easy to be on the stage and telling everyone that how we are managing our work-life balance, but there are times when we fail.
Happy to start that one. So I used to be not only a perfectionist, but perfect until I had a baby. For those of you who have brought a baby home, that's sort of where you figure out that, well, that was the last time that you were actually fully competent in anything, because you have this new problem to solve with no instruction manual, and you have basically no idea what you're doing with a load of additional stress on top. So the way I would describe that is, literally there was sort of a switch in my head. Of course, as an HR person, I had seen a lot of other people transitioning back to work. But basically the switch in my head was just like, okay, I'm no longer, I'm going to go back to work. I'm no longer going to be like Miss top performer. And I'll just, do what I can, because that's all I can do, really. So it was this amazing sort of, in a way, it's a freedom. To sort of let go of that perfection and say, well, it's obvious that if you add those two things together, I'm never going to be able to be perfect or super great at both of them, let alone at the same time. So you just sort of do what you can. And then it was really interesting to find out that my environment, I don't know what, my son would probably not rate me a 10, but my manager and my environment was actually just as happy with my performance. And that was sort of the nice wake-up call to say, well, probably I prioritize better, or just being more relaxed about it and focusing on it just makes it go better. So,
Sriram?
One thing I would say is trust is the currency of all interactions, both at work and at home. One aspect which we talk about is empathy, again, both at work and at home. And that's one where we get challenged when empathizing with kids, because we tend to overlay our lens and baggage, our conditioning onto the kids. So that's one area where I continue to get challenged and continue to learn to try and exercise more present moment awareness. And one thing that has helped me in the last 7 years now is practicing mindfulness, actually, more at home than at work. Because it's a skill of looking at the world from their lens, be it your boys, your children, or at work, where I continue to develop daily.
I don't let you out of the hook. Mindfulness. So tell us some practices, how you do practice mindfulness.
It's interesting. So last week we had our team session, and we had an external trainer come in and go through my direct reports, 30 people, practical uses of mindfulness. And trust was the underlying factor. It was to build trust in a, if I may say, a high-pressured environment. And one practical aspect was just take 3 to 4 deep breaths from your tummy before you start a meeting. As simple as that. Get to your present moment, so you listen from the lens of the person who's speaking to you. Was something very basic, but still, useful.
Thank you. Mike?
I guess building on that, I'm reflecting a little bit on I guess the intensity of communication between us and the whole 24-hour circuit, smartphones and all the rest of it. The lines are kind of getting blurred, right, over the last couple of years between work and the rest of your life. And I think from building on Sriram's points around mindfulness, I think what I've tried to do a better job of is to be there when it's family time, right? So when I have those moments where I know my son's trying to share with me highlights of his day, good or bad, in the same way that I ask both him and his sister, no weapons at the table, so no smartphones when we're having lunch or breakfast or dinner. I think, the same applies for me too. And they'll keep me in check, right? So they'll be like, they'll see that I'm perhaps doing an email while I'm listening to them, and they're like, Dad, and I go, you're right, sorry, right? And so I think it's an effort. It's an effort to be mindful of where you are with your thoughts, with your being, right? So that you can give that moment 100% of your effort and your time and your energy. And I think that applies for work. So why wouldn't it apply also on the home front? So that's something that I find myself more conscious of in the last several years, right?
Andrea, any tricks to be present?
Well, actually, what I was thinking about, I would like to share with you, in a nutshell, a personal experience which I had about 1.5 years ago when I joined GE Aviation. I was transitioning over from oil and gas. My manager at that time, her first name is Melissa. We had a new manager assimilation session with her after about a month after she came on board, which was almost at the same time when I joined the team. And it was definitely not a traditional NMA, for sure, a new manager assimilation, when, the team members would get to know better their new manager in a way that they would raise some questions anonymously, and then the leader can come back to the room and answers those questions. Well, we had in a very different way. First of all, we submitted our questions before we started the session, but more importantly, she shared with us her personal vulnerability, which was a very tough thing, because she was telling us that she was diagnosed with breast cancer 3 years before. And she was actually telling us her story, what she went through, how her managers were standing next to her, were supporting her. Her entire team has given her a great support. So the reason why I wanted to share that with you was that this was the first time when I heard such shocking and fantastic story from my manager face to face. And I was thinking about that, well, yeah, this might be a new way how we can actually, as leaders, show that we are also human beings, and it's okay to actually disclose the issues what we are faced with. And by the way, in this way, we can get more support, and this gives you a great feeling.
Thank you very much. Being connected and being disconnected. I think that's truly a challenge, to be connected when it matters and be disconnected to get connected elsewhere. We recognized in our plan that we should get connected with those kind of employees who are leaving for maternity leave and make sure that they are aware of what's going on in the company, how they can come back, how we can help them. Could you share a few examples as a leader about that, what we are doing in this company? Ilana, HR maybe?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I think it's sort of on multiple fronts, but one of the pieces is sort of the parting discussion when somebody goes on maternity leave or paternity leave, about, let's sort of that contracting and saying, let's definitely stay in touch. And we'd rather talk more often while you're out than less often. I think the ability to sort of project, when you think you're going to be coming back and that may change, of course, right? But some sort of forecasting is part of the trust partnership with the company to say, well, I need to figure out how the work gets done while you're out, so let's work together on this one. And then we also, make a point of including everybody on leave in whatever sort of major events are going on, whether that's the holiday party or summer party or whatever events happen on the various campuses. But that's really what we encourage the leaders to do as well, and the people at home to really stay in touch. And when those, in the part of the business I worked before, we had on average 200 people on maternity leave at any given time. So that's like quite a daunting task to say, how do you make sure that you constantly plan for that reintegration and you constantly sort of keep in touch to know what's the timing. I know a job is going to open up. I know that somebody might be coming at a different time, but it's definitely for everyone online who's at home at the moment, I would say, keep in touch more often rather than less often. And nowadays there's extra ways to do that, right? So you may be friended on Facebook with lots of the leaders at work. So, everybody's a sucker for a cute baby, right? So keep in touch and, come in and show and tell the cute baby and forecast what your plans are.
Thank you. So our time is run up. So any last advice, words of wisdom you would like to close this event? Sriram, let's start from there.
So I would say two things. In the world we live today, creating value is by far the most important trait. Where you are creating value from is less relevant. So that, along with the interconnected world, in this company, the ability to create the value from home with the flexibility with children is pretty high. So that's what I would say would be my parting tip.
I guess my reflections to wrap up would be just a recognition that being a parent's a dynamic thing. It's broken up into chapters, not necessarily neat chapters, right? So your needs as a family and as a working parent are going to be different when your kids are below the age of, say, 3 or 4 versus when they're in elementary school where maybe they need a bit more coaching. And then as they get into their teens, maybe they might be interested in understanding what you actually do at work and what the company actually does and why the values are important. So I think that connection and fostering that connection proactively at every stage of a working parent is important, not only for the employee because they feel fulfilled, but also it's a way for the company to actually permeate the meaningful aspects of life outside work also. So I'd say.
Yeah, I'm with Michael on the communication. I think both inside the company, forecasting and sharing your needs because they do change over time. And I've seen managers think they're making a right decision about a person based on sort of outdated information because they didn't have the update. So that's sort of forecasting where you are and what's important to you at that time. And the same thing at home, I agree. I did hear advice from a panel like this to go ahead and talk about work at home because it shows your kids, you're a whole person, and it shows my spouse as well. I rarely share, but when I do, he sort of gets what I do, and it makes a huge difference. So communication all around.
Actually, I wanted to highlight to you that there's always this question, this very smart question, okay, how about the work-life balance, how we can keep that? My advice to that is that it really depends on your personal circumstances, how your family can support you, how you feel about it. So there's not a one-fit-all recipe. So don't feel bad about if you, let's say, work for longer times than your peer, who is also in a similar situation, because your personal circumstances are all different. So it's really up to you what you need and how others can support you. Okay, so don't feel too bad about it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And I think this is the end of the Facebook Live event, and now these kind ladies and gentlemen are open for questions, so don't be too nice with them, please. All right, we will not move on until we don't get 3 questions, okay? So, so you better hurry up. On anything. Those who are coming from power, they know that this is the rule, right? Then I will point out people.
Okay, so the gentleman mentioned that they were moving around with the family from different countries. And how does it feel for your family and especially for your kids when maybe losing their friends or changing school, different languages, and so on?
I take a stab.
Sure, you take one.
So, so we actually, our first move, my daughter was 11. My son was 10, and we were moving from Brussels to London, and so they'd lived in their little bubble for the first 10 years of their lives, and so much so that my daughter asked me if there were trees in London, right? So she wanted to know if the things that she enjoyed were still going to be there. So it was a bit of a shake-up for her. Interestingly, I think every child reacts differently. So my daughter had a whole flurry of emotions. My son was very matter-of-fact about it. He was like, okay, when are we moving? Right? So, but I do want to highlight that, as we moved to London, we moved when I was still working for GE Capital. And shortly after our move, as you know, GE decided to sell most of GE Capital. And with that decision came the end of the job that actually took me to London, right? So it took a few months for me to sort of digest the challenge of having just moved and only to know that, I was going to have to look for some other gainful employment because London's frightfully expensive. And so after the summer, when I shared with both of them that GE was undergoing this massive change and Dad was going to be part of that change, et cetera, they both understood that. I was going back to Ilona's point. It was important for me to maintain a very open line of communication, but they also knew that that meant that the next role might not be in London, right? And I think I'll forever remember the moment when I shared with them the imminent move towards Budapest, right? So they knew that I was looking for another role, both within GE and outside. And when I shared with both of them the news, again, my daughter, flurry of emotions for about 24 hours about the friends, about the school. Interestingly, my son, who has this kind of, healthy love and admiration for GE, he was, the first words that came out of his mouth weren't, what about my friends? What about the school? Where's Budapest? The first thing he said, honest to God, he said, "Congratulations, Dad. I knew you could do it." All right, so now that's a good story. I think what I'm trying to sort of interpret from these moments is that every child's going to assimilate that change in a different manner, right? I think for me and for my wife, what's worked really, really well is to have a very open line of communication, right? Even a little bit up front of the actual decision. Say, couch things in the perhaps. Now, clearly my kids are old enough for that to be a dialogue, right? Obviously, it's not the same when your child is maybe 5 or 6, right? So it's knowing where your kid is in terms of their own development, and then working with that to build a sense of confidence that actually it's going to be all right. The important thing is that we're together, and then we'll figure it out. Everything you've done here, there's no reason why you can't do it again. After all, it's your efforts that created your circle of friends, your grades, everything that you create is the fruit of your own effort, right? And so because that comes with you, it's kind of irrelevant where you are because that you carry that with you, and that's kind of what we've tried to build in their view, and so much so that now that we're in Budapest, while they absolutely love their life here, they both know at any given point in time that if the need arises or whatever, should we have to change again, there's a serenity about that they've already kind of overcome that hurdle and they know what it looks like and they understand the mechanics of it.
Thank you.
I think Michael touched on most points. Communication. One aspect I would say is the interconnected world helps. So there is a pain out there that their close friends are left behind in Frankfurt or Düsseldorf or wherever. We do tend to travel back to get together. But apart from that, it's communication. Not at that age yet, but yes, it's getting there. So.
Thank you. We got 2 more questions. Yep. See?
How long did you stay at home, and what influenced your decision to come back, and how did you feel like having to go back?
Yeah, so the question was to Ilona and to myself how long we stayed home with our kids and what made us to decide on when we want to come back. So actually, to be very honest with you, I'm really happy that I've never been in a situation when I really had to choose between family and work. So I got enough support and still get enough support from my family's side. I wouldn't be able to do such a hard decision because both are my loves, and I love working, but also love being a mother. So therefore, in case of my first kid, when she was born, and in both cases, I would say, let me start with this. I had the chance, and actually it was important for me to discuss with my managers that time that, hey, this is the situation, I'm expecting a baby, so my due date is this and this, so let's decide together when I would come back and into what position and things like that. So you have to be fair with your managers, right? You have to disclose it in time. Sooner or later, it will become visible anyway. But it's good. It gives you a good feeling to have a kind of a plan. So in the first case, actually, when I was younger, compared to when my little one was born, I would say, even more ambitious. So I really didn't want to stay at home for too long. So it was 6 months. That's how we planned with my manager, and I came back after 6 months as we agreed. During the second case, I enjoyed being at home with my little one a little bit more, I would say. I was probably more mature, and so the way how it worked, we discussed with my manager in advance that I would stay at home roughly for about 1 year. After 6 months, my team started to work on a new big project, which was about the transfer of work. And I was asked by my manager that, okay, would you be willing to come back in a part-time job, but working full-time from home? And I was more than happy to do that because, by that time, after 6 months, I felt like, yeah, I was ready to take on some tasks, but on the other hand, I was very happy to have the chance that I could do it from home. So during the next 4 months, I was working like that. So after 10 months, I went back to work.
So mine was much easier. I just have one son, and my husband basically kind of made the decision. We were still dating when he announced that he wanted to stay at home on leave when we had a baby, and I was a little disappointed. And I sort of felt like I had to negotiate, like, okay, well, while I'm still nursing, can I please stay at home? So it ended up being I was home for a year, and then he stayed home for year 2 and year 3.
Thank you. There was another question there.
My question would be, what do you think, what is the difference between the working parents culture of Hungary comparing to the other countries?
Do you want me to take part of that?
Yeah, well, you can start. I can tell it.
So one answer is I think each of the country contexts is quite different, and I think each of the sort of, even though we have an overall company culture in G, there's also sort of micro cultures, I would say, if you look at like working time as an example, but along with that is also flexibility. So just in terms of, you can find, a kind of range of flexibility and attitudes in all different places. But one of the things that struck me was that in Hungary, we're sort of really fighting for part-time opportunities. And then in other countries, I've done a survey of SPB and above women when I was at GE Healthcare all across Europe. And then it turned out that in the countries where there's a lot of part-time, Netherlands, Germany, Switzerland, they actually have problems that are caused by the reverse, which is that they have a whole bunch of subconscious bias about how mothers are in the workplace and how they should work, and that, you know, they should have a part-time job basically and not be too serious about their careers. So it was just interesting for me to see, and of course it's always interesting to see what your context from the outside, but to say, okay, this thing that we're fighting so hard for, it actually has a downside as well that we need to be careful of.
I can tell you, outside of Europe or America experience, I worked a lot in Asia. And I have to tell you, it basically doesn't exist. Kids are grown up by their grandparents. So that's the very typical thing. While the parents are working, the grandparents are taking care of their kids. So as a business leader, you really need to live with the reality, with the society over there. So for me, it was weird that the ladies in Vietnam came back to work after 4 months being at home, from which, by the way, they spent 1 whole month in the bed, because that's the Vietnamese suspicion that for a whole month you're not allowed to get out from the bed, and you need to eat black chicken soup, which is as nice as it sounds. Okay, so that's the culture there. So I think the culture around us really determines the opportunities, and I think in Hungary that's pretty good, and definitely in GE we are ahead of the curve. Okay, and I think that was the last. I saw the sign that we are over. So thank you very much again. I really enjoyed that, and I hope our audience enjoyed that too. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Nagyon rossz íze van.
You're supposed to eat when you're pregnant.
Hogy mi az? És 1 hónapig, az első 1 hónapig.
Első 1 hónapban ágy. Első 1 hónap ágy. És de úgy, hogy nem kelhető.
Kérünk mindenkit, hogy ne menjetek még el, mert most jön a film, és utána Hoppál Borival fogjuk folytatni. Látom, gyors. 5 perc szünet van, úgy látjuk, hogy a természet mindenkit elszólít a mosdó felé, úgyhogy akkor 5 perc múlva várunk mindenkit vissza szeretettel.